best and fastest researcher in the West. And we are coming to you, I guess, live on a very solemn day. It depends on how you look at it. Some people probably think this is like a joyous day in American history. Some people say it's solemn. It is definitely, it's definitely a day in American history. That's for sure. For those of you who don't know, Donald Trump today in his trial was convicted, found guilty on all 34 felony accounts. First time that's ever happened in American history that a former president has been convicted or found guilty in a criminal trial after his presidency. So here we are. We had a show planned for you, and as is the world, this happened, and we went, okay, well, now we definitely have to talk about this. This is the biggest political story out there right now. So before we get started, how are you doing tonight, Camille?
Well, you called me the best and fastest researcher, and and then I had an hour's notice that this is our topic.
And then nothing happened. Yeah, I mean, we joked about it in the text, but then I was like, I didn't really say like, yes, we're absolutely going to be doing this topic until I like posted it, and then
right,
you
like,
saw it, and we're like,
else.
So yeah.
So I don't have a bunch of research here. So I'm going to be asking you a lot of questions. Obviously, I know what was happening with the trial. I get all that, but from a legal standpoint, you are an attorney.
Yes.
And therefore, as we go through this, I'm probably going to be like, wait, what does that mean? I totally researched our other topic that we were supposed to talk about. I learned a whole lot.
We had a lot of stuff. Like, we had a really well-researched episode. It was going to be all about special districts. We'll end up doing that episode eventually.
No, I know. It was when this came out, I was like, nobody's going to care about anything. Like, it's either we talk about Trump or don't even podcast, because a lot of people have jobs that, yes, they heard the news, but they didn't necessarily get to like delve into it and everything. And so they're going to go home and want to be glued to what is happening. That's
right.
So yeah, it'd be cruel of us to not talk about it.
Yeah, it would kind of feel weird if we were like, the biggest political news probably ever to happen in American history happened just 2 or 3 hours ago. And we went, hey guys, do you want to learn about special districts and what they are? People would be like, what the heck are we tuning into? But no, this is what we do for you. We jump in, and yeah, we always try to focus on California. But I mean, presidency, this definitely matters. The presidency definitely has a big impact on what do you call it? On California. So yeah, I mean, we have to talk about it. So where should we begin talking about what happened in the Trump trial? Should we just kind of give like an overview of like what happened, or do you want to ask any questions right off the bat?
Yeah, give it like some background.
Sure. Okay, I'm going to try and do this as simply as possible. So background, the DA for Manhattan District in New York City, Alvin Bragg, we're going to watch some of his press conference a little bit later. He came up with this charge against Donald Trump for falsifying business records related to hush money that he paid to Stormy Daniels. This came out of the fact that Trump had an affair with Stormy Daniels while he was married. And they didn't want to let this come out, I think, around election time. So they came to an agreement and they settled, and he said, here, I'll pay you a bunch of money. You just don't say anything.
Right. There was 2 women.
Yeah. And Stormy Daniels broke that agreement and went ahead and told the world that she slept with Donald Trump. I don't know how she's not liable for breaking an agreement like that. But that's a whole different story. So
that whole thing, though, it's like, okay, so she wants to admit that she had an affair with Donald Trump of all people, but admit that you had an affair and ruin your own reputation, and then all of a sudden it's like, why now? Why? Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you don't know about who Stormy Daniels is, she is a porn star. So, she slept with. That's what she alleges. They slept together. We're not sitting here trying to defend adultery or infidelity or anything like that. But yeah, so that's where it all it all came back. So Stormy Daniels has sort of been surfacing. She's kind of floating on the perimeters of the Donald Trump world since 2016. And then it was discovered that the Trump enterprise, the Trump business, had written off the hush money on the business records, which they classified it, and I forget what they classified it as, but they classified it incorrectly. So when you file for tax or you file your business records or stuff like that, they found that he had paid Stormy Daniels, and they said, oh, well, you falsified it. This isn't what you said it was. And that's where we are. I mean, that's basically the gist of the entire
proper tax code for paying off mistresses. We would have let it slide, but
yeah,
I'm just kidding.
It sounds so kind of crazy and absurd when you think about it. You're like,
this is going to be a great movie. I mean, this is,
isn't it? I mean, some people say it's not too dissimilar from like when Clinton paid off Paula Jones to like go away and shut up. I guess Bill Clinton classified it correct. He should have called up Bill Clinton and said, hey, how do you classify this on business records? Because I didn't do this correctly. So that's where we're at. That was basically the trial. There's 34 counts. They all sort of were the same thing, falsifying records or whatever.
Right.
I'm not going to go through every 34 counts because it's not really that important to the show. So Alvin Bragg brought this case, and a lot of legal experts were like, yeah, I don't know if you really have a case here. You're really kind of like, you're kind of grasping at straws here. Well, don't let a man.
He had a case.
Yeah, spoiler alert. He did have a case. Don't let a DA of Manhattan, don't let that deter you. Because I didn't look this up, and maybe I should have looked this up before we hopped on. It's no secret that Biden probably won Manhattan by a landslide. It wasn't close when it came to the political lines of what happened in 2020. So we're painting the narrative here. We're painting what's going on here. So you have a Manhattan DA bringing charges against Donald Trump. They want to try the case in Manhattan. Now, when you go to trial, there's this thing called voir dire. It's a fancy term for when you have to select the jury. And it's a long process. You have to go through it, and you have to you bring in dozens and dozens and dozens of people, because you have to go through a bunch of people before you seat like 12 jurors. Mm-hmm. And the process is you go through, you kind of vet people. Okay, what's your name? What's your job? What do you do? And there's like a whole science behind this. Like there are people who make like tons of money being jury experts. And like you bring them in and they'll sit in on voir dire for you. And they'll tell you like, well, this person has this job, so they'd be sympathetic. This person, identifies it, so they would be sympathetic. Like, so you're trying. What's that?
I said, I think I need that job.
Judging people in a jury box? It pays really well. So if you can become a jury expert who helps with that, like most cases are won or lost in jury selection, because if you get a favorable jury, then you're already off to a good start, because the jury's already in your favor. You kind of have an idea of what they're going to do. So imagine now you're in Manhattan. You got to pick from people who live in Manhattan to be jurors in a criminal trial against Donald Trump. What do you think the odds are that those jurors are not going to be biased?
None. There's like they're going to be biased. There's 100%.
Right. So it's also tough because this is also happens in like celebrity cases as well. It's happened, I'm sure, in the Kyle Rittenhouse case as well. Like well-known cases like this are hard to pick juries because people are already prejudiced to the story. They already know what's going on. So if you mix the fact that they're already prejudiced against the person, the defendant, and then they're prejudiced against the story of what's happening, it's going to be pretty hard to put together a jury that is not completely skewed against Donald Trump.
You
I
know,
remember that there was.
sorry, side
Go
note.
ahead.
Today in text, you brought up the O.J. Simpson trial and said, you know, you were too young to even care about what was going on about that, but you imagine
Right.
it was kind of like similar. I actually remember hearing the constant news because my parents were watching it, so I was watching it. But I remember hearing the constant news about the jury trials,
Mhm.
and that was very fascinating to me. Like I actually learned them. Like, oh, this is
Mhm.
how they do it.
Yeah, it's yeah, I wasn't old enough to remember like sitting there watching the
old.
O.J. Simpson. So I'm not implying that. I'm just saying
I
I
know
think
you're not.
I'm just saying I don't particularly remember sitting in front of the TV watching the O.J. Simpson trial. So I imagine like today when this all came out, I was actually in my office watching it, and I was like, I'm surprised more people in a law firm were not on top of this or watching.
You guys were all like there. Like, did you have soda and popcorn? And you were just like, oh,
I thought about it. I was like, I'm surprised more people aren't like huddled around my TV being like, what's going on? Like, what's the jury? I mean, lawyers are busy. We put on blinders. We just kind of, we put the world out.
Like this. Sorry, we're getting way off topic, but
way off topic.
I think that like a law firm would be like, oh my gosh, because like you said, this is going to be one of the biggest trials in history of like our life, probably. I mean,
yeah,
he's got
absolutely.
a few other criminal trials that may be bigger, but like this is one of the biggest things that like.
Well, yeah, this has never happened before in the history of America. You've never had a former president be convicted for a crime after he was president. So this is, we're in uncharted waters. Like Secret Service has to figure out like, what if he has to go to jail? Like, how do we protect the former president while he's in jail? Do we have to stay with him all the time? Like, there's so many issues that nobody's ever considered. And constitutionally, as far as I know, you can still be president from jail. I don't think that's a barring thing. So he could be elected from jail. But we're getting off topic. We'll talk about this
like
more.
I have that question, so it was.
Maybe someone probably has that question. Can you be president from jail? As far as I know, I've never heard any constitutional argument that you cannot be president from jail. It doesn't say that.
Run for Congress from jail.
You can run for Congress from jail, so why not be president from jail? Could you imagine he's like in his jail cell and they set up like a little mini Oval Office with a desk and stuff, and he has to like sit at his desk and like they have to bring him papers and stuff. Oh my gosh.
We're really off topic.
Really off. Like I said off the top, this is an episode where
we didn't know.
we're reacting to this as much as all of you are right now. This is the thing about doing this live, is that we are reacting as much as you are, and stuff is still coming out. Anyway, so back to the trial. You have this most likely biased jury out of Manhattan. There was one story of a girl who got excused from the jury because it was too, like, her social media was all like, I hate Donald Trump and stuff like that. Which obviously is prejudicial. So I was thinking, like, how many more people do you think were on that jury who just didn't say anything about how much they hate Donald Trump or was on their social media? So,
well, it's like either way, you can't really say. I mean, it's unlikely that there was a MAGA Trumper in there, but if you were, you couldn't say. You just sort of be like, oh yeah, Donald Trump, president, cool.
Speaking of Trump, he just texted me and said,
"Did he now?"
From Trump, all hell just broke loose in all caps. I was convicted in a rigged trial. I need you to read this now. I'm sorry, Mr. President. I'm in the middle of a podcast about your trial. So.
Let's real quick, since you got that text just now. WinRed broke, like it crashed, because people were literally rushing to donate to Trump, and it just couldn't handle the overload of donations, and it just crashed.
Right.
So that's interesting.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we're gonna get to that in a little bit. What the ramifications are.
I'll shut up.
We're all over. We're just so excited. This is such an exciting episode.
And we have a text from RFK Jr. Nothing from Trump.
Oh, RFK is like, I'm the only person not convicted of a felony in this case. Anyway, so we have the trial, biased jury, judge. I was looking at it before. Let's see. There was I want to get this correct because there was an issue with the judge in terms of bias. What was it?
Right. Weren't they encouraging him to, what's the legal term when you excuse yourself from a case because of a bias?
Recuse yourself.
Okay. Because I did see that they were trying to get him to do that.
Right. I think his daughter worked for a firm that helped Biden or worked for the Biden campaign. Which, oh God, that's
a stretch.
I mean, depends on does the dad like Biden? I mean, I don't know if we figured that out as well. So that was one thing they were, but the judge did some weird things in this case, like the jury instructions. They weren't allowed to go back with jury instructions. When you go back in the deliberation room, you get to hold on to jury instructions. And that means so you look at all the evidence in front of you and you look at these jury instructions, and the jury instructions will literally say if the person is found to meet this element and this element and this element, then you should convict. They weren't allowed to bring the jury instructions back for some reason. They and this is 34 felony counts. They weren't allowed to bring the jury instructions back. So I don't know how they were supposed to remember all of the different. I'm not sure how they were supposed to remember all the different elements. I mean, that's like when you study for the bar, you have to remember the elements. To remember elements, which is already hard enough. So there's a lot of shadiness in terms of how this went down. And most legal minds who are not in the, right in the barrel for Biden and hate Donald Trump, most normal lawyers look at how this has really been put out there. And I'm not a criminal defense lawyer, so excuse my expertise, but at least I know what goes on in trials. A lot of this is very unusual to be doing in a criminal trial. So the jury instructions is definitely something that is head scratching. They sent them back with just a laptop with all the stuff on it, and only one person can control the laptop. So that's a little fishy as well. Obviously the supposed bias of the judge, he was denying motions that probably made sense on the face of it. So it just seemed like throughout the whole process of this trial, for a lack of a better term, it does seem like Trump was getting railroaded in Manhattan. And that's where we're at. So they came back today. They returned 34 counts, found guilty on all 34 counts. And now we're at the next step. We have a person who's running for the presidency of the United States who has a very good shot of winning presidency of the United States. And he's been convicted on all these crimes. And now where do we go from here? Well, sentencing's in July. They'll figure out what his sentence is going to be. I was reading in this AP article. This is actually pretty interesting. I wish I could highlight on this article. Usually I can, but from AP, it says the big question now is whether Trump could go to prison. The answer is uncertain. Judge Juan M. Merchant set sentencing for July 11th, just days before Republicans are set to formally nominate him for president. Charge of falsifying business records is a Class E felony in New York. The lowest tier of felony charges in the state is punishable by up to 4 years in prison, though the punishment would ultimately be up to the judge. There's no guarantee he would give Trump time behind bars. Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg declined to say whether prosecutors would seek prison time. Interesting. It's unclear to what extent the judge may factor in the political and logistical complexities of jailing a former president who is running to reclaim the White House. Other punishments could include a fine or probation. It's possible the judge would allow Trump to avoid serving any punishment until after he exhausts his appeals. Trump faces the threat of more serious prison time in 3 other cases he's facing, but those cases have been bogged down by appeals and other legal fights. So there you have it. So he could go to prison, or it could be a fine or a probation. It's interesting. Alvin Bragg already said that they're unsure whether they're going to seek prison time, because you would think the whole thing is you want to put him behind bars.
4 years starting in January.
Yeah. What's that?
I said 4
Starting-
years starting in January.
Yes. Can he be put in bars specifically for 4 years starting in January? There was something else. Okay. Appeal. So now this is the next question that everyone's going to be asking, which is obviously it's going to get overturned on appeal.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say obviously, right? Like I'm not going to, when it comes to courts.
Right. But obviously he's going to try. Although I think he's already said
Oh,
that.
yeah. They obviously are going to try. I'm sure they were already prepared. I'm sure they already have people working on it right now at the law firm.
They already got merch. You can buy your shirt tomorrow.
They already got appeal merch that you can buy to support the cause. I'm never going to say obviously. A lot of people out there, influencers, are probably like, oh, it's going to get overturned on appeal. Obviously, it's going to get overturned on appeal. Courts are a wild card. I will just say that. It's what I tell my clients. You go to court, you could have the best case in the world. Doesn't matter. Judge can just have a bad day, not like your case, disagree with you. Doesn't matter. So I would say it has a strong chance of being overturned on appeal, but I wouldn't say obviously. Let's see. Oh, here it is. The defense has accused the judge of bias, citing his daughter's work heading a firm whose clients have included President Joe Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, and other Democrats. The judge refused the defense's request to remove himself from the case, saying he was certain of his ability to be fair and impartial. Let's see. Trump's lawyer may also raise on appeal the judge's ruling limiting the testimony of a potential defense expert witness. The defense wanted to call Bradley Smith, a Republican law professor who served on the Federal Election Commission, to rebut the prosecution's contention that the hush money payments amounted to campaign finance violations. The defense may also argue that jurors were improperly allowed to hear sometimes graphic testimony from porn actor Stormy Daniels about her alleged sexual encounter with him in 2006. The defense unsuccessfully pushed for a mistrial over the tawdry details prosecutors elicited from Daniels. Defense lawyer Todd Blanche argued Daniels' description of a power imbalance with the older, taller Trump was a, quote, dog whistle for rape, relevant to the charges at hand and the kind of testimony that makes it impossible
Wait,
to
back up. What now? The rape part?
He said it was, quote, a dog whistle for rape. So when you put a witness on a stand, there are rules of what the witness can say.
Mm-hmm.
And usually this is determined in pre-trial, which is called like motions in limine. So this is without the jury there. You go in front of the judge and you say, Your Honor, this witness is going to come up. They're going to talk about this. They're going to testify to this evidence. This is why they're testifying. However, we would ask that they don't testify about X because it's prejudicial. It's inflammatory. It doesn't help our case. It may, it may unduly prejudice the jury, saying, put stuff in the jury's mind. So they put guardrails on like when witnesses can come up and what they can talk about. So what they're alleging is that the prosecution literally put Stormy Daniels on and asked her these questions to paint a picture that Donald Trump sexually assault, like he came onto her and forced himself on her. So that had nothing to do with the case, though. The case was all about falsifying business records. So the prosecution got away with putting this out there to the jury, which paints the defendant in a bad light already. And it doesn't have anything to do with the case at hand. Now, most judges would probably say, they'd probably stop there and say, like, well, this has nothing to do with the case, objection relevance. That could be something right there. But so there's a lot of things.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
There you give an emotional, like, obviously then the jurors are like, that's an emotional thought right there. They're like, rapist,
yeah.
Should be charged.
Sorry. Winnie is on one tonight. She is on one tonight. I don't know what is up with her. Yeah, I mean, here's a hypothetical example. So if you're in trial and I'm trying to think of it, the example. If you're on trial for, I'm trying to say something like a car accident or something, and you're trying to show the person is liable, right? You're trying to say like, well, this person clearly ran the red light or something like that. And then all of a sudden you get into the whole thing about like, but also, is it true that you're a drunk and you beat your wife and stuff like that? Like, how does that look to the jury? You're like, oh, this guy's kind of like a scumbag. So of course he's going to
That's
be liable.
the beginning of Aaron Brockovich movie. I don't know how accurate that
Oh,
was to her life, but that was the Aaron Brockovich movie. It's basically she got in a car accident, she was hit, but then they paint her as this like this woman with multiple baby daddies who can't hold down a job, and like like so she needed this car accident. So,
yeah. That's a fine line in cases. You're not supposed to really testify or kind of get into character evidence unless it has to do with whatever the crime is or whatever your case is about. So that's sort of the lay of the land. They're going to file an appeal. I would expect that they're going to say you should stay sentencing because of X, Y, and Z. This is an emergency. This is exigent circumstances. And they'll stay sentencing as long as possible during the appeal so that he can't be sentenced or sent to prison. Delay as long as possible, probably past November. And we'll see where we go from there. So what happens when, okay, last thing, and then we'll get into Alvin Bragg. When you file an appeal, you can ask for a stay of the verdict or the judgment, meaning like, don't put this into effect. We want to appeal because we think this is wrong. So the appellate court can issue a stay, which means everything stays the same way. Nothing happens. No one goes to jail. A verdict doesn't get imposed or punishment doesn't get imposed. So that's where we're at. Whether they're going to give them a stay or not, who knows? Again, this is New York. So keep in mind, this appellate court is still in New York. So I would like to think, but appellate judges, when they get to the bench, like when they get moved from trial to appellate, usually they're high quality judges. They've been around for a long time. They get vetted. So we'll see. So that's where we're at litigation wise.
quick reminder, we elect judges in California.
We do elect judges. So keep that in mind when you're filling out your ballots in November. Don't skip over judges. Make sure you review who is running for judges. So any questions before we go on to Alvin Bragg?
How long, if they say that like we're going to appeal, how long, if they're allowed, if they're granted this permission, how long do they have to then file the appeal?
Usually you file notice of appeal. And then I think it's within, in California, I think it's within 30 days. So they want you to get the appeal up in the appellate court. That doesn't mean they're going to hear it right away. Right. Usually you write these long briefs that are full of research and facts and all that stuff. And especially a case like this, there's going to be a lot of stuff that they have to put on appeal. So they'll get it done pretty quickly. They'll get the briefing done, and then they'll set it for oral arguments months down the road. So hypothetically, it could be the rest of the summer. It could be maybe fall. We hear when they're going to go. But they could also argue, the other side, the respondent, who is in this case the district attorney, they could say, no, we need to hear this as fast as possible. Obviously, this is like exigent circumstance. I don't know if it's true that you really need to say it's exigent circumstances for a guy who falsified business records. It's not like, he's a serial killer out on the loose. But they tried this, so I wouldn't be surprised with whatever else they're going to try.
And then you read that there was something about maximum 4 years in prison. Is that, that's overall or per count?
Per count.
Okay.
So what's 34 times 4?
Something.
It's a big number.
Yeah, 132 months.
It would be, I think if it was 4 years for every count, he'd be in jail for the rest of his life.
Well, yeah.
So that's where we're at. Any thoughts about the case right now?
What I said before we got on, can you guys please stop saying I'm going to vote for a convicted felon for the first time? Please stop. You're not.
Yes.
You're not winning any favors for Trump. I promise you. You're not.
I know it sounds badass right now.
No, it doesn't.
Or you
No.
think it sounds badass, but I don't think it's I don't think it's, you don't want to be echoing. I guess they're trying to take it away from the left, who is we already know the left is going to run with this and say, you know, Donald Trump was the first president who's a convicted felon running for president, and blah blah blah, and they're going to run with that ad nauseum.
Yeah, like it's just going to be, it's going to forever now. Convicted felon, President Trump. Like that's going to be his new title. Forever.
Right. Of course, if it gets overturned on appeal, then the conviction's overturned and it doesn't apply anymore. But
they'll still use
it's about
convicted felon president. It's just
formerly convicted president.
Yeah.
This was something I want to show really quickly. This popped up on my X account, and this is I've seen them before, interactive polls. So this was April 15th. Trump's approval rating was +1. May 16th, he was +8. Now, post-conviction, he's +18 on Biden.
Okay, so maybe the voting for a convicted felon is working. Maybe I take back what I said.
Maybe.
Apologies. Carry on.
Carry on with what you're doing. So we'll talk about it once we go over everything. I think we can talk about where do we go from here and what do we think the ramifications are. So let's watch a little bit of Alvin Bragg. Alvin Bragg is the district attorney of Manhattan. So he did not, as far as I don't think he tried this case. So he's just the district attorney. District attorney don't usually try the cases. Just because they're too busy actually running the whole office. But let's listen to what some of the stuff he has to say. He'll eventually start speaking, I think, after he adjusts his
Good evening.
4 more times.
First and foremost, I want to thank the jury for its service. Jurors perform a fundamental civic duty. Their service is literally the cornerstone of our judicial system. We should all.
Recordings just got better. Hey, it's Dana from Stream.
Sorry. They snuck in an ad there.
For the careful attention that this jury paid to the evidence and the law and their time and commitment over these past several weeks. 12 everyday New Yorkers, and of course, our alternates, heard testimony from 22 witnesses, including former and current employees of the defendant, media executives, book publishers, custodians of records, and others. They reviewed call logs, text messages, and emails. They heard recordings. They saw checks and invoices, bank statements, and calendar appointments. This type of white-collar prosecution is core to what we do at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. In the 1930s, District Attorney Thomas Dewey ushered in the era of the modern, independent professional prosecutor. For now nearly 90 years, dedicated professionals in this office have built upon that fine tradition. A major part of our practice during that nearly 90 years has been public integrity work, including cases involving jurists, local and state electeds, public servants, and others. I want to thank this phenomenal prosecution team, embodying the finest traditions of this office: professionalism, integrity, dedication, and service. They are model public servants, and I am proud and humbled to serve side by side with them. The 12 everyday jurors vowed to make a decision based on the evidence and the law, and the evidence and the law alone. Their deliberations led them to a unanimous conclusion beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant, Donald J. Trump, is guilty of 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree to conceal a scheme to corrupt the 2016 election.
Okay, hold on. That I don't think that was part of what they were going. Where did my flip flop go? Anyway, I'm a mess over here. That was not part of what they were going after. I lost my flip flop and I was trying to get it and stuff falling all over the place. As far as I know, that is not what they were trying. Their whole thing was that this was a way to corrupt the 2016 election. Do they really think? If news came out that Donald Trump had slept with a porn star and cheated on his wife, who is a former supermodel, playboy, whatever, do you think that would have hurt his chances in 2016?
No, a lot came out. There was like, remember the grab him by the video that came out? Like,
right. Like he won regardless of the Billy, what was it, Billy Baldwin tape?
Or Billy Bush.
Billy Bush, not Billy Baldwin. So he thinks that this whole conspiracy to shut Stormy Daniels up somehow corrupted 2016 election to the point where he should go to jail over it. Like, I don't, that's not really the part of it. I think it's mostly these falsifying business records, which they had to scramble or stretch to try and get even this across the finish line. But I that's news to me. That again, I'm watching this for the first time because this is all happening so fast. I haven't seen this, so I had to stop and be like, that was what this was about. You think that this whole thing corrupted the 2016 election to the point where he snuck it in? So now it's because he paid Stormy Daniels hush money. That's why he won in 2016, and he conspired with Russia, and that's why he won the 2016 election. Like, the left doesn't want to admit that they just lost in 2016 to a novice politician who had never run for any political office ever in his life and ran for president and won on his first try.
Is it possible that Donald Trump paid her hush money to keep her quiet? And yes, the timing was when he was running for president, but it was more like now that he's running for president, he didn't want his wife to know that he cheated, like while she was like pregnant and having a baby.
Possibly. I think that was one thing, was that they didn't want her to find out, so he was covering it up so that Melania didn't find out, because that would have probably looked bad if Melania left him in the middle of a presidential campaign.
True.
She stuck by him through all this, so clearly, it's going to be much harder to try and get her to leave Donald Trump. She stuck with him through all this. So, and
it's funny how people make comments about that, negative comments about her sticking by him, and yet Hillary stayed by Bill. So,
Hillary literally stayed with Bill Clinton, who went on like the biggest national court of public opinion trial with Monica Lewinsky and Paula Jones and all that, and she stood by her man, and no one faults her for that.
And while this defendant, maybe unlike any other in American history, we arrived at this trial and ultimately today at this verdict in the same manner as every other case that comes through the courtroom doors, by following the facts and the law and doing so without fear or favor. I want to conclude by expressing deep gratitude to the NYPD and the officers of the Office of Court Administration for securing the courthouse, all of our safety, making sure the courthouse and all of the other matters that are important in their own right continued seamlessly. They will continue to be and have always been incredible partners. Thank you.
So that was basically it. Not for a guy who's the district attorney of Manhattan, I thought he would be a little bit more charismatic.
Yeah, well, it's funny. His most charismatic part started when he was like, basically, we caught Trump. We got him. Yeah. He was kind of like, thank you. And then all of a sudden, and Trump.
And Donald J. Trump. There. And he really drilled that home and corrupt the 2016 election. Right. If that's what you think this is about. I heard this on a podcast somewhere and someone made a good point that like this whole, like, why did they wait? This might be why all of this is backfiring on the left and Joe Biden. You had 4 years from 2020 until now. If Trump was guilty of all this stuff, why wait until 2024 for all these cases to all of a sudden come about? Like late 2023, like early 2024. Like, why did all of a sudden these cases come out right now? I mean, you can put your tinfoil hat on, you can say what you want, but to the American voter, it does look suspicious that they waited until 2024 to bring all of this stuff against Donald Trump. Like, you couldn't bring it in 2021, you couldn't bring it in 2022. You waited until 2024. And I think that's one reason why a lot of people are not buying this. And I think if that interactive polls we saw on X was any indication, then maybe this is actually helping Trump. But I want to watch real quick a little bit of Jonathan Turley is a constitutional law professor. He is no fan of Donald Trump. He's come out and said that, like, he's not a Trumper. He's not a MAGA guy. He's kind of like an Alan Dershowitz without the whole being on the Epstein list kind of thing. Like he's not a fan of Trump, but he's a constitutional law professor and he calls it like it is. So okay. He was on Fox News and he said, I believe Trump verdict will be reversed in state or federal systems. So let's give it a quick look. I should probably start sharing it.
Yeah, that'd be appreciated.
Are moments I've had in a courtroom, and I was just observing. The judge had just said that the jury could not reach a decision and that we would be dismissed for the day. Some reporters actually gathered their stuff and was starting to leave. And then the judge came and basically said, my mistake, we just got a note saying there's a verdict. Throughout this time, you could feel the building pressure in that courtroom. The one person that didn't seem to register it was the former president. He had been chatting with counsel. He didn't show any emotion at all as this mantra of guilty verdicts was read. And there was a great, I think that this is one of those things that is really embodies the entire Trump era. There were people who clearly were thrilled by the result. and there are people that will be very sad by it. I was saddened to watch it. I disagree with this verdict. I think, as I've said before, that this case was legally unfounded. When they were reading those guilty verdicts, the one thing that we didn't know is really what he was found guilty of. Because if you remember, the judge allowed the jury to find guilt on any one of 3 secondary crimes. We weren't told whether the jury found any one of those crimes, whether they found all 3 of those crimes. I'm not too sure we will know that. That's one of the many issues that I think presents reversible problems in this case. So what I would say is that this is a historic moment. We all have to take a breath. But for those upset by this verdict, remember this remains a country committed to the...
Why does every outdoor brand...
They're hitting us hard with the ads this time.
And this is going to go up on appeal. I think it's going to be reversed in the state or federal systems. But it's moments like this when you're on the other side, when you disagree with a verdict, that you have to take a leap of faith in the rule of law. It's what defines us. Many people feel that this case really embodied the antithesis of that. But as a country as a whole, we have a system in place to review this. For Donald Trump, that's not going to happen before the election in all likelihood. But let's keep in mind that this is not the only court. It's just the first one.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there have also been jury trials and judges and decisions that have been made that have already been tough for the former president in other contexts too, in the business context, in another personal case involving E. Jean Carroll. I mean, there are other decisions that have been made against him that have been very difficult. They've been in New York. What do you think that portends or does not with these other cases we have pending? Georgia doesn't look like it's going to get to a trial before we get to November. You've got the 2 federal cases. We're waiting for the Supreme Court decision on immunity, which could come as early as next Thursday. We get opinions then again. What will that case mean to all of these things that are pending or have already been decided? When it comes to this question, we heard the arguments there at the Supreme Court. There were 2 extremes. Anything and everything the president does, you can't question any of it. There must be full immunity from any kind of criminal activity. 2, there's nothing. There's no protection from him. We know the justices are going to land, we think, somewhere in between, not go with those extremes. But how critical now is that decision as we wait for that?
Well, it's very critical, both in terms of the law and the timing. The court did seem to reject the extremes on both sides. They didn't like the extremes of the Trump team in terms of the sweeping immunity, but they also didn't like the Court of Appeals approach. Mm-hmm. They felt that it gave too little recognition of the needs of the office. So they could end up sending this back for further evidence and for determinations by the trial court. It seems unlikely.
Okay, so that wasn't he was going to start talking about more of what's going on in the other cases. Let's see. So I want to get his take on it. Like I said, Jonathan Turley is a constitutional law professor at George Washington University. Again, he's not a Trumper by any stretch of the imagination. He is not a MAGA guy. He's not a rah-rah MAGA guy. So he's usually pretty spot on. I think he kind of rose to prominence during the impeachment trials. But anyway, he makes a good point that this is the first court. It's going to go up on appellate court. And if the appellate court doesn't agree, you can always appeal it to the Supreme Court of New York. And then if that doesn't work, you can go to the United States Supreme Court. So there are avenues for him to appeal to get this turned over. Here's a question that might be for some people to ponder. Do you think they care whether or not it gets overturned on appeal? Like, what do you think?
Do I think people care or do I care? What's the question?
Do the people who, so like Alvin Bragg, he got his win. He got the conviction. He got the 34 counts. At this point politically, do you think they care if it gets overturned on appeal? Or do you think that to them, the damage is done? Like they've done what they were supposed to do. Like, do you think they care if it gets overturned on appeal?
I think for the probably not, probably, like you said, they did what they wanted. The damage is done. Like we joked about, if it gets overturned, they're just going to be like formerly convicted felon Donald Trump. Like, you know, that's always going to follow him now. And
Yeah.
there's even, because I still hear people argue, well, he was accused or convicted or whatever of this. And it's like, well, no, there was, you know, allegations, but he formally hadn't been convicted of something.
Right.
And yet people believed that and still went with that. And I think they just chose to believe that, and or not that they just chose to believe it, but they heard it. It was all they needed to know, and that's like forever is just gonna, that's their forever opinion of him.
Right. Yeah, I think it's one of those. It got out there. It created the narrative. People will go with it now for the up until the election. Oh, he was convicted. He was found guilty in criminal court in Manhattan. If it gets overturned on appeal, I don't think they'll care necessarily. They'll say a jury of his peers found him guilty. Well, I don't know if Manhattan jurors are a jury of his peers.
Every so often, you know, we'll hear somebody come forward and say, I was anti-Trump and now I've realized and I've changed my mind. And like, there's always going to be those few, but I don't think it's going to be a majority. The majority of people know, like, they know who Donald Trump is, even teenagers, you know, young kids, they know the Donald Trump name, and everyone has kind of formed an opinion of him. And very few, I think, will change their minds.
Right.
What do you think?
Okay. I think, I don't think they care if it gets overturned on appeal. I think they got their political ammunition for this fall. Biden is suffering really badly in every area of like what Americans care about. Like Trump's wiping the floor with him on like the top 5 issues when it comes to like the economy, immigration, crime. Like Trump's just wiping the floor with him on like poll after poll after poll. He's beating him in all swing states. And that's not accounting for like the secret Trump vote that people who don't say they're going to vote for Trump, but probably will go out and pull the lever for Trump. So there's a good Zero Hedge article I was reading the other day that internally in the White House, people are freaking out and losing their mind because they're basically of the mindset of like, we're not going to win this thing. Like we can't win with Biden. He's down in all the polls. There's nothing he can do. Like the economy is taking a bad turn. So even internally in the White House, people are freaking out. So this is the Hail Mary that the Biden administration and the Democrats have to go with to try and have some sort of argument to say, well, you can't elect this guy because he was a convicted felon. Now, it sounds horrible, but when you get down to the nitty gritty, it's like, okay, what was he convicted of? Well, he put the wrong tax code. He put the wrong thing down on his business records, or his employees put down the wrong thing. It doesn't sound as bad as, is he a convicted felon because he's a rapist or he's a murderer or, you know, stuff like that. So I think this is their one Hail Mary. They're going to run with it and yell, scream at the top of their lungs about Donald Trump being a convicted felon. And the one common string you see in all these cases is the novel legal arguments they have that they've brought to try and get Trump. So, for example, he brought up the Jean Carroll case, which I had forgotten about. I forgot all about the Jean Carroll case. The defamation case that, like, he defamed her by saying it never happened, but they couldn't prove it did happen. So somehow he was guilty of defamation because he said it didn't happen. Like, that was one of those ones where we're like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. And then the other one was with the loans and the banks. They were like, well, he overvalued his estate or his real estate, so the banks would give him loans. And the banks all came in and testified. They're like, we love Donald Trump. He was a great client. He was the golden calf. The goose that laid the golden eggs. Like, everyone was excited about having Donald Trump as a client. Made them a ton of money. Like, everyone walked away happy. There was no damages. But for some reason, because no one was harmed, they stretched the law and changed the law to show that that was a crime, even though literally everybody probably does it. Like that one boggled my mind because there was nobody who was damaged. There was nobody who was harmed in that case. The banks were happy that they made a ton of money. And at the end of the day, like there was really no crime or any, well, it wasn't a crime. It was civilly liable. That one baffled my mind. So, and the other thing is like, you have people who do this. So if you go to a bank and you need to appraise your loan or appraise your properties, you don't think the bank's going to get their own appraiser to come in and appraise those properties themselves? You think they're blindly just going to accept your appraisal?
Well,
Like, the
it's
banks
usually you usually hire, at least here in California, you would hire a company. So my last job, I was a commercial real estate appraiser. Banks hired us. And
there you go.
but oftentimes, and it's not like we were fudging numbers, but oftentimes it was like, what number do you need? And it wasn't like, oh, we're making up numbers, but it would be like oftentimes it'd be like, we cannot hit that number. That's not going to be possible. We are not going to appraise it at that. And so they would just pull it based on that alone. Like, it's like, they're not trying to make it up. It was just like, okay, that number's not going to happen. It's not going to work.
Right. Yeah.
I have a little bit of experience at this.
Oh, so I didn't even know you had experience, and we touched upon it. Yeah, that's the common string for me is you look at all these cases and you're like, man, they really had to stretch to get any of these things into court and into trial. Like there are some novel legal arguments, but that's what appellate courts are for, because you can bring it up to the appellate court and they can kind of review it and be like, this was an abuse of process, abuse of discretion, all these things. But this is the big one. I think this is the big one that people were waiting for. At the end of the day, to kind of summarize while we finish up here, do I think this hurts Donald Trump? No, I don't think it hurts Donald Trump. Do I think it helps him? I think marginally. I think we looked at that poll from Interact Polls, at how reliable they are. We'll see polls probably over the next coming days. I don't think it hurts Trump as much as the left thinks it's going to hurt him. So I think if any,
when Red Cross was pretty, I mean, that was within 45 minutes, an hour of the verdict.
Yeah.
They crashed.
They couldn't even take that many donations. Like, that's how many people were donating to WinRed. Yeah, I don't think it hurts Donald Trump. I think if anything, it plays into what he's saying, that if they're after me and they're trying to put me away, what do you think they're going to try to do to you? And it works with his campaign message. So I don't know. Any final thoughts? I mean, it's literally 3 or 4 hours old, this news at this point.
No, I'm sure I'm going to have more questions this week, and I'm going to like annoy you as my attorney friend and be like, what does this mean? But this second, no.
Yeah, I that's all I have to say really about it. I mean, we kind of gave you the lay of the land. We gave you our opinion. People are still reacting. I'm sure there's articles feverishly being written right now about what's going to happen to Donald Trump. But like I said, my opinion as of this moment, I don't think it hurts. I think in the end, it probably ends up helping him. So we'll see where it goes from there. But biggest political story, I don't know, probably in a long time is this has been one of the biggest political stories in our history. Never happened before. So we had to do a whole episode on it because it's just such monumental breaking news. And then
someone died, and then we just were like, let's talk about California.
Yeah, exactly. There was no way we could talk about California and what we were originally going to talk about tonight. So thank you to everyone for coming on. Oh, sorry. Did you have any final thoughts before we logged off?
No, you asked me, and I told you I would.
I'm sorry. Okay.
I'm good.
Just want to make sure. I don't want to cut you off and be like, if you had any final thoughts, and then we ended the episode.
I would cut you off, and you know I would. So
you would just stop and be like, stop before you go into your ending spiel. All right. So everyone, thank you for tuning in. We got the YouTube working again this time. Thank you for everyone tuning in live. If you're ever tuning in live and you want to ask us a question while we're doing this show, please do so. Like, add your commentary.
we charge.
Yeah,
I'm kidding.
It'll be a 0.1 every question. I'll charge you. I'll send the invoice. But yeah, if you're watching live, as I see people on YouTube and Rumble are right now, ask questions, chime in, let us know what's going on. What are you thinking? That's why we do this live, so that people can interact with the show and ask us what's going on or give us their opinion and stuff like that. So,
Well, now I have a final thought. People are watching, and they could be watching like anything right now. I mean, any like actual, not that we're not actual news, but actual news. They could be watching mainstream media. They could be like, or Fox tuning in and like seeing the story, and yet they came to watch us and our, amazing banter that we have. And so thank you, everyone who's watching.
yeah,
live.
thank you.
It's very kind of
Yeah,
you.
that's a very good point. Yeah. I mean, you could be watching Fox or what is it, Newsmax, or what are some other shows? I don't know. I don't watch a lot of the news anymore anyway. I just read a lot of it. But yeah, you guys tuned in to watch us talk about the Trump conviction. So unless there's anybody on the chat right now who has one last question, I'll give you 10 seconds. We'll count down if you have any questions before we sign off. There's a moment of silence. You got 5 seconds. Any last questions or comments before we sign off? I see you out there. I see you people watching. So, no? Okay. All right. With that.
Go ahead.
Oh, you were actually counting. I was just giving a vague 10 seconds. All right. So, with that, thank you everyone for tuning in. And as always, make sure you like, share, subscribe, review, all that stuff. And the best way to support this show that is absolutely free is to share this with someone who you think would really enjoy this type of content, enjoy this type of show. And